Rancher, take the cursed native girl that the townsfolk feared in, and his life changed forever. The night wind burned like sandpaper across her skin. Ihala stumbled through the dust, her wrists still raw from the rope, her heartbeat echoing the whip's last crack behind her. The gate of the Vane Ranch slammed shut, and with it, every fragile piece of her belonging. Moonlight washed the desert in a cruel silver glare. The rocks of Red Mesa glowed faintly, like embers refusing to die. She pressed a trembling hand against her bruised cheek, but did not cry. They had called her cursed, said her Apache blood bewitched men and brought shame to women, yet even in disgrace. She walked upright, her shadow long and unbroken against the dust. Somewhere beyond the ridges, coyotes sang to the night. Ihala lifted her face to the wind. If this world would not give her mercy, then it would learn her endurance. The sun rose like a blade over Red Mesa foothills, slicing through the haze of dust that clung to the world. The land burned in shades of copper and rust, mesas rising like forgotten altars, and the air so dry it seemed to hum. Grass had long given up trying to grow here. Only stubborn yucca and creosote clung to life, their scent mixing with the tang of horse sweat and scorched earth. By noon, Ihala walked beneath the open sky, her skin bronzed to the same hue as the land itself. Her dress, once pale cotton, now hung in tatters. Each step stirred the dust, coating her ankles red. She carried a small bundle, a woven pouch, a bone charm, and a folded piece of cloth once belonging to her mother. Her hair, black as volcanic glass, stuck to her temples with sweat. But her eyes, sharp amber, alert and unbending, held the same quiet fire that had terrified those who cast her out. Ihala was the daughter of a hunter who had died with a rifle in his hands, and a mother who had sung to the sunrise until her lungs gave out. From them she had inherited two things: a body built for endurance, and a silence that spoke louder than defiance. When the heat shimmered too much to bear, a wagon appeared on the road. Ezra Cobb's, the old man's voice, roughened by dust and years, broke the stillness. "You look like hell, girl," he muttered. Reining in his mule, he was a drifter, a messenger between ranches, who had once helped her find work at the Vane place. Guilt flickered in his eyes when he saw her state. Without questions, he handed her a canteen and a worn blanket. "I know someone who don't talk much, but treats folks fair," he said. "Name's Wade Marin." They rode west, where the foothills sank toward a dry stream called Coyote Creek. The world changed little along the way, just more sky, more silence. Wade's ranch appeared at last, a small house with a sagging porch, corrals built from sun-bleached posts, and a windmill that turned lazily in the heat. He was outside, chopping firewood, his shirt clinging to a body hardened by years of labor. His face bore the kind of stillness found only in men who had lost more than they could name. A faded scar ran from his temple to the edge of his jaw, not ugly, just permanent, like a truth he no longer bothered to hide. Ezra nodded toward him. "There's your chance, girl. He's a good man." Though the desert took most of his words, Wade looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time, blue-gray, unreadable as the horizon. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of the windmill turning, and the soft rasp of the earth between them. Ezra climbed down from the wagon, dusting his hat. "Wade," he called, his voice cutting through the still heat. "Found you some help, if you've a mind for it." Wade Marin leaned on his axe handle, studying the girl standing beside the wagon wheel. She looked half-starved, her dress torn, her hands roughened from work, but her spine was straight, and her gaze didn't waver. "Name's Ihala," Ezra said softly. "Knows her way around a corral and a cook fire. Just needs a fair chance." Wade's eyes flicked toward the horizon before returning to her. "You running from something?" Ihala hesitated, then answered simply, "I was sent away." The man gave a slow nod, as though he'd expected nothing more. "If you're looking for pity, you won't find it here." "I'm not," she replied, her voice steady, though her throat was dry. "I just need work." For a long moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then Wade lifted a piece of wood and split it clean with one strike. "Fine. The chores start before sunup. There's a spare cot in the shed. You eat when the stock's fed, same as me." Ezra smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Told you he was fair," he murmured to Ihala. A man of few words, but none wasted. Then he turned his wagon toward the horizon, leaving a trail of dust that shimmered and disappeared. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. Ihala watched Wade pick up the chopped logs, his movements precise, unhurried. When she bent to help, he stopped her with a small shake of his head. "You'll get your turn," he said quietly, later. She followed him to the corral. Horses snorted in the dry air, their hides glistening with sweat. Wade's touch with them was calm, almost reverent. He didn't shout, didn't strike, just moved with the kind of patience born from years of solitude. "Where'd you learn to work stock?" he asked at last. "My father," she said. "He hunted with the cavalry before they turned on our camp." He paused, hand resting on a horse's neck. "That's so." It wasn't judgment in his tone, only the weary knowledge of someone who'd seen too much of men's cruelty. When dusk came, the desert cooled. Carrying the faint scent of mesquite smoke, Wade handed her a tin cup of water. "You'll eat in the morning," he said. "Too late for fire now," she nodded, cradling the cup like a precious thing. He turned away, but before stepping into the cabin, he glanced back, perhaps to see if she'd vanish with the wind like everything else in his life. She didn't. Under the dim wash of starlight, Ihala spread her blanket near the corral and sat still, watching the windmill turn. From the cabin came the faint strum of a guitar, slow, hesitant, as if the instrument had forgotten joy. For the first time since being cast out, she didn't feel hunted, only watched, not by suspicion, but by someone who understood silence the way she did. Morning on the red mesa broke in golden ash. The air still tasted of iron from last night's wind, and the ground steamed faintly where the dew met dust. Ihala rose before dawn, just as Wade had said, and began to work, hauling buckets from the well, scattering grain, stoking the fire until it breathed again. Wade watched from the corral. She moved with the precision of someone who had long ago learned that hesitation costs survival. When the chickens scattered, she hissed softly in Apache, a sound between word and wind, and they quieted. He'd never seen that kind of calm control. They didn't speak much those first days. Words in that desert felt expensive. Wade mended fences while Ihala cooked, the smell of beans and cornbread drifting out through the cracks of the cabin wall. She never entered the house. She left his meals on the porch, the tin plates polished clean before nightfall. He, in turn, never commented, but once, when she went to fetch water, she found the bucket already filled and a folded rag beside it, damp and cool. When the heat swelled, Wade led a horse to the creek bed, where only trickles of water ran beneath the stones. "The land dies slow here," he said at last. You get used to watching things fade before they fall. Ihala crouched beside him, running her fingers through the dust-choked stream. Back home, we said the earth only sleeps. It wakes when the people remember its name. He looked at her then, not as a laborer or burden, but as someone who might still believe in things he'd forgotten. You still remember? Her eyes lifted, bright beneath the sun. Every sunrise teaches me again, that night. He left his guitar on the porch. She didn't touch it. But when the moon rose high, she hummed a tune so soft the coyotes answered. Wade sat inside, listening, his hands still against the wood of the instrument. He hadn't heard a voice in this house since before his wife died. Somehow, the sound didn't hurt. It steadied him. Days turned to weeks. A rhythm formed, her footsteps across the yard, his hammer on the corral posts, the shared silence of two lives mending in parallel. Sometimes, when he passed her near the barn, their shoulders brushed, and both pretended not to notice. Once, while she was cleaning a saddle, Wade stepped too close and saw the bruises still faint on her arms. The marks from the Vane Ranch hadn't yet faded. His jaw tightened. "They did that to you?" She froze, then nodded. "I heal slow." He exhaled, voice low. "They should have been made to answer." Ihala shook her head. "Let them choke on their shame. I breathe dust. But I'm free." The next morning, he left a small bundle by her cot, a bar of lye soap and a new hair comb, wrapped in cloth. No words attached. When she found it, she held it as if it might vanish, then looked toward the corral, where he was saddling a horse. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't thank him aloud. She didn't have to. Late one evening, a storm began to brew. The sky turned the color of pewter, the wind rising in short, angry bursts. Wade hurried to tie the horses. Ihala ran beside him, her skirt whipping like a torn flag. Lightning split the mesa, and in that flash, he saw her, soaked, barefoot, her hair streaming across her shoulders. And for one dizzy moment, he thought of sunlight breaking through ash. They reached the barn, panting. She laughed, the first real laugh he'd ever heard from her, breathless and alive. He could smell the rain on her skin, sharp and clean. Wade looked at her, voice rough. "You shouldn't be out in that." And missed the sky, remembering how to weep, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. After the storm passed, the air smelled of clay and cedar. He built a small fire outside, and they sat in its circle, drying their boots. The silence was easy now, no need for fences in it. When she rose to go, he said quietly, "Tomorrow, I'll teach you to ride one of the bays. Easier to work if you don't walk the fences." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to warm him for the rest of the night. By mid-July, the land around Red Mesa had turned the color of rusted iron. The creek near the barn was nothing but a scar of cracked clay. Days passed without wind, until even silence began to hum. Wade could read the weather like a language. He knew something was coming long before the clouds gathered. That morning, the air felt too still. The horizon shimmered as if breathing. Ihala was in the yard, spreading a blanket of laundry when the first low growl of thunder rolled over the mesa. "Storm?" she asked. Wade looked up from the corral, sweat darkening his shirt. "A big one." His voice was calm, but his eyes had that faraway look he wore whenever the past pressed close. Together, they moved quickly, pulling tools inside, tying the horses, slamming shutters before the wind found its strength. Dust began to rise, twisting across the ground in small spirals. The sky took on the sickly yellow tint that made animals restless. The air stank of iron and static. As she struggled with a feed sack, Ihala's hair whipped around her face. She laughed breathlessly, wiping grit from her lips. Wade stopped for a heartbeat, struck by the sound, a real laugh, clear as water. "You think this is funny?" he asked. "It's life," she said. "If it wants to throw dust, let it." Then the world answered. A wall of wind slammed across the yard, hurling grit and straw into the air. The barn door banged open. Wade swore and sprinted for it. Ihala followed, fighting the gale. Her skirt tore at the hem, her bare feet slipping on the packed earth. They reached the door together, forcing it shut against the howl. For a moment, only the roar of sand filled their ears. Then, faint but growing louder hoofbeats. Ihala froze. Wade lifted his head, every muscle taut. Out of the swirling dust came 3 riders, their shapes distorted by the storm. The lead horse reared, its rider pulling hard on the reins. "Stay inside," Wade said. She didn't move. "Who?" He didn't answer. He already knew. Lucas Vane swung down from his saddle, his boots sinking into the wet dust. He wore a fine coat smeared with sweat and whiskey. The gun at his hip gleamed even through the haze. "There you are," he shouted over the wind. "Thought you could hide her forever." Ihala backed a step, heart pounding. The 2 men behind Lucas fanned out, half blinded by grit. Wade stepped forward, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the storm. "You've got no business here, Vane." Lucas barked a laugh, wild and bitter. "No business. She was ours until she brought shame on my family. My mother's dead, Marin, and that little savage walked free." Wade didn't flinch. "Your mother had more decency than you'll ever know. She threw her out because she saw what kind of man you were." Lucas's smirk faltered. "You don't know a damn thing about my mother. I know she deserved better than a son who drinks and blames ghosts." One of Lucas's men shifted nervously. "Lucas, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Lucas snapped, his face red, eyes wild. He turned the fury back on Ihala. "Look at her. You think she's innocent. She used me, like her kind always does." Ihala's voice, when it came, was steady. "You used yourself." "Lucas, I only wanted to work." The wind tore her words apart, but Wade heard them. He took a slow step forward, placing himself between her and the gun. "Go home," he said. "The storm's not kind to fools." Lucas laughed again, but the sound cracked. "You think you can talk me down? You think hiding behind a half-breed will make you righteous?" Wade's hand curled around the coiled rope still hanging from his belt. "I think a man ought to know when to quit talking." Lightning forked behind them, turning the dust white. The horses shrieked. Lucas's hand twitched toward his pistol. "Don't," Wade said quietly. "Not unless you plan to use it." For a heartbeat. No one breathed. Then Lucas drew clumsy, the barrel wavering in the wind. The shot went wide, splitting a fence post. Wade moved faster than anger. He caught Lucas's wrist, twisted hard, and the gun dropped into the mud. They struggled, 2 silhouettes in the storm, until Wade shoved him back, chest heaving. "You done," Wade growled. Lucas stumbled, his pride bleeding faster than his lip. "You'll regret crossing me." "Maybe," Wade said, "but not half as much as you'll regret who you've become." The younger man's eyes blazed. "You think she's worth it?" That filthy Wade's tone cut him off like a blade. "Say one more word about her, and you'll leave this mesa on your back." The other riders had already begun to turn away, their courage gone with the sun. "Come on, Lucas," one muttered. "It ain't worth it." For a moment, Lucas looked ready to spit another insult, but the wind rose, slapping grit against his face. and he saw Wade's steady stance, the quiet certainty in his eyes. The fury broke. He grabbed his reins and swung into the saddle. "You keep her," he spat. "See what curse follows you next." Then he kicked his horse, disappearing into the storm. The others followed, their outlines swallowed by the red haze. Wade stood still, the gun half buried at his feet. Rain began to fall, thick drops that sizzled against the hot dust. The smell of wet earth spread like forgiveness. Ahala stepped closer, her voice trembling. "He'll come back. Not tonight." He stooped, picked up the pistol, and tossed it into the trough. Steam hissed. The thunder rolled again, softer this time. She reached for his hands. They were raw where the rope had burned him earlier and led him toward the shelter of the porch. Inside, the lantern swung weakly in the wind. She took a basin, filled it with rainwater, and washed his palms. Blood and dust spiraled together, thin as memory. He watched her in silence until she spoke. "You didn't have to defend me, didn't I?" he said, voice barely audible. "Seems to me you've been fighting alone long enough." Outside, the storm began to fade. The desert, freshly washed, glowed dark and alive again. Wade leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion and calm warring in his face. "Every time it rains," he murmured, "this land remembers it was once kind." Ahala looked out into the night, where the lightning still flickered along the mesa's edge. "Then maybe it'll remember us too." Wade turned to her, and for the first time in years, he smiled faint, rough, but real. "Maybe it already has." The thunder sighed and moved on. The ranch fell quiet except for the drip of rain off the eaves and the sound of two steady breaths finding the same rhythm. When morning came, the world was clean again. The storm had rinsed the land bare, leaving the air cool and raw. Water clung to the fence posts like beads of glass, and the red soil steamed beneath the new sun. Wade stepped outside barefoot, the ground soft under his heels, for the first time in months. Coyote Creek carried a thin ribbon of water, glinting between the stones. He found Ahala near the barn, her hair damp, the hem of her dress heavy with mud. She was spreading hay for the horses, humming a tune in her own language, a low, swaying rhythm that seemed to belong to the earth more than to her. "Morning," he said quietly. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "It's different after rain, like the land's breathing again." "Yeah." Wade looked around the yard. "Almost looks alive." He hesitated before adding, "So do you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. She blinked, not sure if he meant them kindly or carelessly, but he didn't take them back. He just kept watching her, as if trying to memorize the shape of peace. They worked together that day without many words, fixing the fence that the storm had torn apart once, when a post splintered and cut her palm. Wade took her hand, wrapping it with a strip torn from his own sleeve. She wanted to protest, but the warmth of his hand steadied her. "You don't need to," she whispered. He met her gaze. "Maybe I do." By late afternoon, the wind had gone still again. The sun melted toward the ridges, turning the mesas gold. Ahala cooked beans and bread inside the cabin, and for the first time, Wade didn't eat on the porch. He sat across from her, the air between them thick with unspoken things. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "You never asked why I was cast out. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me," he said. She stared into the fire. "The boy, Lucas. He tried to force himself on me in the stables. His mother saw us and thought I'd tempted him. She said women like me were made to ruin men. That's what they called me, a curse." Her hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt. I thought maybe they were right. Everywhere I go, trouble follows. Wade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You didn't bring trouble. You walked through it. He paused, choosing his words like stones over a river. You can't make people see truth they don't want to, but you can outlive their lies. She looked up then, and something behind her eyes shifted, a glimmer of disbelief turning into the faintest trust. And you, she asked softly, what ghosts follow you? He let out a slow breath. My wife died here. Fever took her one winter. I was gone driving cattle, came back too late. I thought if I kept working, kept punishing myself, the silence would drown the guilt. But silence only listens. It never forgets. The fire cracked between them. Outside, a nighthawk called once, long and low. Ihala reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. Maybe silence isn't meant to bury the past, she said. Maybe it's where the heart waits to be heard. For a moment. Wade didn't move. Then his hand closed over hers, rough palm against soft skin, and neither of them pulled away. Later, when the lamps were blown out, they sat by the doorway watching the moon climb above the mesa. The desert shimmered silver, somewhere far off. A coyote barked. You still think he'll come back? Wade asked. Ihala shook her head. No, he already lost what he came to take. What's that? My fear. Wade turned to her, studying her profile in the moonlight. You're not afraid of much anymore. Are you? She smiled faintly, only of forgetting what it feels like to belong. He hesitated, then said, You don't have to forget. Not here. The words were simple, but they landed deep. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since being thrown into the desert, she believed that peace could exist without having to beg for it. The night breathed around them, warm and alive. Wade leaned back against the porch post, and she rested her head beside his shoulder, close enough that their breaths mingled. The land that had once burned them both now felt merciful, as if the storm had washed away not just dust, but the past itself. By the time August settled over Red Mesa, the land had softened, the storm scars faded into shallow gullies, and the mesquite trees bloomed with stubborn white flowers. Each morning, Wade rose before dawn and found Ihala already outside, feeding the horses or singing quietly to herself while she worked. Her songs were never loud, but they lingered in the air long after she fell silent. The kind of sound the desert might remember. Their lives had slipped into a rhythm that needed no promises. Wade built a new fence line, and she planted beans in the shadow of the barn. Sometimes they shared words, other times. Only the space between them spoke. When the sun set, they ate together under the porch light. A man who once believed solitude was a punishment, and a woman who had turned exile into strength. One afternoon, as Wade was hauling hay from the far paddock, a wagon approached down the ridge road. Its wheels squeaked against the dry ruts, and the driver raised a hand in greeting long before he was close enough to speak. Ihala shaded her eyes, smiling. Ezra. The old man pulled his mule to a stop and tipped his hat, his face creased in that half-worried, half-relieved way of his. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Didn't think the desert could turn two ghosts into folks again. Wade came forward to shake his hand. What brings you out here, Ezra? Wiped his brow. News travels slow, but it travels. Margaret Vane passed last week. Fever took her. Lucas packed up and rode north. Wyoming territory, they say. Ain't no one left to speak your name, girl. He looked toward Ihala, his tone softening. You could go anywhere now. Town work. Maybe. Nobody's chasing you no more. Ehala stood still, her hands brushing the dust from her apron. For a moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes wandered toward the mesa, where Wade was stacking bales of hay in the last light. The sky behind him burned the color of copper. No, she said finally. I've gone far enough. I'd rather stay where I've already been found. Ezra watched her face, then smiled. I reckon that's a good reason as any. He climbed back onto the wagon, shaking the reins. You two keep the peace out here. Not much of it left in this world. When the wagon disappeared down the trail, silence filled the space he left behind. The sun dropped behind the ridges, casting long blue shadows across the field. Wade came up the path, his shirt damp, hair clinging to his forehead. What did he want? She looked at him. The lines at his eyes, the dust on his jaw, the quiet certainty in the way he moved. Just to tell me I'm free, she said. He studied her a long moment. And what does that mean to you, E? Hala turned toward the horizon. It means I can choose where the wind carries me. And her eyes found his. I'm tired of the wind. Wade smiled then, slow, genuine, the kind that began in his eyes before reaching his mouth. You planning on staying? Then if you'll have me, she said. He stepped closer, close enough that the fading light fell evenly across both their faces. You don't ask to stay, he murmured. You just do. The air between them stilled. Somewhere nearby, the horses stamped softly, restless but content. Ehala reached up, brushing a streak of dust from his cheek with her thumb. You've still got the look of a man waiting for something, she whispered. Maybe I was, he said. Maybe I just didn't know what. Her lips parted, trembling between laughter and tears. You always talk like the desert, quiet. But it burns when it touches you. He chuckled low in his chest. Then I hope you like the heat. For a long time. Neither spoke. The sun sank behind them, and the mesa blazed with color, scarlet bleeding into gold, gold fading into violet. It painted the world as if to prove that even endings could be beautiful. Ehala leaned her head against his shoulder. Back home, she said softly. My mother used to tell a story about a woman who became the dawn because she refused to die in darkness. The sky still carries her name every morning. Wade looked toward the rim of the world, where the last edge of sunlight glowed like fire through glass. Sounds like she was stubborn. She was brave. Ehala corrected. And I think she's still out there, somewhere between night and end day. He smiled faintly. Then I guess I found her. Her eyes shone, but she didn't reply. Instead, she reached for his hand, their fingers fitting easily, as if the world had been waiting for this exact shape. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from some far-off storm. The horses quieted. A nightbird called once from the cottonwood tree, then again, as if echoing their breath. When darkness came, the mesa glowed under the rising moon, its cliffs turning silver. The two figures on the porch didn't move. They sat together, watching the desert shimmer, the kind of stillness that only comes when two souls finally stop running, somewhere deep in the hills. A trickle of water sang through the stones, Coyote Creek waking after its long sleep. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Out here, under the endless western sky, love is not spoken, it's proven in silence, in grit, and in the mercy two lost hearts can offer each other. At Untold Wild West Stories, we keep those moments alive. Stories of redemption born in dust, of people who find home not in towns or fences, but in one another. Every tale carries the wind of the frontier, the weight of memory, and the quiet grace of second chances. Because in the untamed West, even the harshest land can bloom again when the heart dares to stay.